I am waiting on Tom. Tom Kaye lives in like the middle of nowhere, dinosaur country, like the Badlands or somewhere in Wyoming. So his internet is always rather sketchy. So I will entertain you guys until then, and I answer questions and do things and tap dance until Tom shows up. Hello to everybody who is around the world watching. We've got all these international people. Hello to Mary Johns in New Zealand. I believe she is maybe North Island, New Zealand. I believe Auckland, perhaps. Also, special hello to Ariadne Oliver. She is in England. Hello, dear. How are you? And let's see. All right. So somebody, Wyoming, that's where you're from. Okay. Well, we're just going to keep tap dancing. Somebody just asked a second ago about the $20 bills that Cooper used to buy his ticket and also to buy his drink that his $1 drink with a $20 bill. I'd often joke that he was already inconveniencing Florence Schaffner before the hijacking even began, because he was her first customer. She started at the back of the plane, and Tina started service at the front of the plane during drink service. It was only a 36-minute flight, so they were already serving drinks on the ground. That was when they started drink service. So Cooper paid his $1 drink with a 20, which basically a $20 bill back then is basically $100 now. So imagine buying a drink for $5 and handing somebody a $100 bill. It was pretty silly. But he was already inconveniencing Schaffner, because she told him, she said, I have to get change for this. Can I serve everybody else their drinks and then come back? And he said, yes, that's fine. So just another interaction that he had with her before. So Florence Schaffner is pretty special as a witness, because she's the only witness we have who was aware of Cooper before he was a hijacker, and also obviously aware after he became a hijacker. In fact, she was with him the very moment that he became a hijacker. So I really do like her as a witness, and I believe the FBI really valued her as a witness. I think she had some pretty vivid memories for sure. Whereas Tina's interesting. I think Tina is, oh, well, here's Tom. Okay, great. Oh, there you are. Okay.
We were stuck out in the, I was in the outback digging up fossils, and we got stuck having to carry one out, and it was a long slug to get out.
What was it?
I'm here.
What was it? A Triceratops horn or a T-Rex?
No, it was a mosasaur. Hold on, let me turn up some volume.
Mosasaur. That's like
it's an aquatic reptile.
Oh, the mosasaur. That's the huge that's the thing that they had in that Jurassic Park movie that eats people, right?
Ate the cow. Do you remember in the beginning it came up and ate the cow? Boom.
Yeah, and I think it also ate a woman at the end of one of those movies. I believe it ate a pterodactyl who was carrying a woman, so it ate the woman and the pterodactyl. Which I'm not sure.
Everything in that age ate everything else, right? So
yeah. So anyway, well, great. I'm glad you're able to join us. So essentially, what I wanted to do is we're going to talk science, and we're going to take some questions from people. But really, I wanted to talk to you, Tom. Everybody always talks to you about the science and stuff, but really, I wanted to talk a little bit just about your general thoughts on the hijacking and all this other stuff. So essentially, my first question was, when did you first hear about D.B. Cooper?
Well, when I was young, I heard about Cooper. So I kind of, in the back of my mind knew that there was some guy that jumped out of an airplane in 1971, and it was kind of a mystery. So I probably knew as much as the general public knows about Cooper. Most people, strangely enough, have heard about Cooper, but they don't know many details. But they know there was some guy jumped out of a plane thing, hijacking. So I knew about that most of my life. It wasn't until I got contacted by Jerry Warner about doing research into the thing that the case got real.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. Like, obviously, so it wasn't the FBI, because I was going to ask you, it wasn't the FBI who contacted you directly. It was Georgia.
Yeah. Hold on a second.
I think you're crooked. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. I was adjusting my camera a bit. I set my camera a different way when I'm not using it. Okay, yeah. So go ahead.
I was just saying that it wasn't the FBI who contacted you. It was Georgia. Well, Jerry, yeah. So he was looking for a scientist. I believe maybe was Larry on the drop zone at that time and said, "Someone find me a scientist," or
no? What happened was Larry came out of the drop zone and they were discussing the money, and I don't know who it was. Maybe it was Georgia. Georgia's the name, his handle on the forum on the drop zone forum. For those of you who don't know, and they were discussing the money, is the way I understood it. And somebody asked Larry Carr. He said, "Well, would you let somebody outside the FBI analyze the money?" And amazingly, Larry Carr said yes, right? Which I think it's got to be a 1 in a million shot right there that he would do that. I don't think the FBI is in the business of letting other people do their stuff.
Nope.
So he said yes, right? And then what that led to Jerry looking for scientists. I originally thought that they contacted a bunch of them, and a bunch of them said no, and I was the only moron to say yes.
Yeah.
But Jerry later told me, he goes, "No, you were the first guy I called." So I didn't know Jerry. He knew me through astronomy and some other things that I do scientifically. So he kind of knew of my reputation. So that's how that came about.
Yeah, Larry is a real hero. I can tell you that, having spent a long time digging through the FBI files, he really is a unique FBI agent. The fact that he was able to, crowdsource, I guess, but I guess the difference though with him and the other agents is that it was still really a active case for a lot of the earlier agents in time. It was pretty fresh enough. I mean, we look at things and we go, oh, 1985, this document. Well, that's 14 years later, but that's just 2010 or something. So it's not from now back then. It's not like crazy. So, but yeah, so that was always a common thing. People said, "Oh, well, Kaye was like the 8th guy they contacted," but I don't. That never sounded right. So
well, either way, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you got it.
Kind of thing. Most scientists, when you call them up and say, "Hey, you want to do something?" They've got too much going on. When I call colleagues, I say, "Hey, we've got this project going on. You want to get involved in it?" It's right up their alley, and they know me, and they know everything we're doing. Most of them are too busy. It's unusual.
Yeah,
so,
you and I are similar in a lot of ways, as far as like we've been lucky that our occupations allow us the freedom to do to DB Cooper. A lot of lawyers, they play golf. I DB Cooper is the way that I say it. So
yeah, well, you had it figured out a lot earlier than I did, right? You figured out the right place to be in the legal world to be able to have that free time and still make a living.
Yeah, it's a good gig I've got going on.
Can I have a drink?
Yeah,
and so I'm gonna ask my wife for a drink here. 1 second.
Yeah, that's fine. You're fine.
Go ahead.
But I guess a couple other questions, just general Cooper questions that you're never really asked about a lot. The flight path. What do you think about the flight path? Is there any chance of a discrepancy there?
So the flight path was interesting because if the flight path is an open question as to whether or not they knew where the plane was, then you can make a lot of speculations on where Cooper jumped, right? Was he over Tina Bar, all that? Well, a lot of people would like to have it. It would certainly make life easier if the flight path was over Tina Bar. And this had been discussed, in the early days of the drop zone too. So before Eric did the CooperCon thing, Jeff Gray put on his version of a CooperCon, and I gave a talk on the flight path. And I had done an analysis where I found all of the SAGE radar sites on the West Coast, and like 7 of them, something like that. So I located them on Google Earth, and then I drew the flight path according to the documents, and I raised the flight path up to 10,000 feet. So on Google Earth, you can draw a line through the air. Okay. So then I went to each of the SAGE radars, and I sat down on the ground and I looked up at where the flight path was, and I see if I could see it or not. Right. So you could see the flight path from at least one of the radars for the entire time.
Wow.
So considering this was the most sophisticated radar at the time, and we know a lot more about it now than we knew back in 2008, there's been a lot of research done. I think it's very hard to believe that they wouldn't know where that plane was, especially if they could have them on radar continuously. And the SAGE radar, the big famous thing from the way I understand the SAGE radar works is it famously combined all these radars into one output.
That's right.
So somewhere there must have been the flight path must have been translated. I think this is speculation on my part. I have no idea if it's true or not. I got to think if the SAGE had been recording the flight path, that's where the translation came in for the map that's at the FBI.
That's correct.
And maybe some of those little X marks that are on the map are SAGE radar marks or something. Again, speculation on my part, but there must have been something. Well, I think we're missing a lot of the details in that.
Well, as I understand it from, Chris Cunningham has done a lot of research on the flight path. Great stuff. He's talked to SAGE radar people. He's talked to Spangler, the guy who literally brought the flight path map over to the FBI, Captain Spangler, who was also on the sled test. But essentially the way they explained it was that so they had the ability to record in real time certain data that needed to be recorded. And if a plane was being hijacked, and it was essentially if it was squawking the hijack code on the transponder, it would instantly trigger the recording mechanism for SAGE radar to record that plane. So and they recorded it all the way. I don't know when they turned it on. I suppose the flight path kind of begins a little bit south of Seattle, the map at least, where they start drawing it. But it goes all the way to Reno, and essentially that map is dated. I believe the date that I have on the map that I found in the FBI files was 11/26/71. So it was turned in literally one day after Thanksgiving. So, but Spangler and them who were talking to Chris said that it was spit out in real time, that they could just get it off a hard drive somehow and plot it. And that was that. And they even, the arguments about the flight path, it's interesting too, because they even, a year later, when the FBI found nothing in the drop zone, they were like, well, maybe the flight path's wrong. And they said, could you recalculate it? And the SAGE people said, sure, we'll get the data again, because they still had the hard drives, I guess. And they actually calculated it even smaller of a scope. So it went from a mile wide to, I believe, a quarter mile wide on the flight path. So that's what they were able to do. And yeah, there's no reason to think that if something was designed to track missiles coming in and Soviet bombers, it's
over the horizon. Yeah, there was over the horizon bombers, right? When they came over the horizon, they were supposed to be able to pick them up.
Yeah. So if they're looking, like you said, their SAGE stations were literally in visible range, even not like, over the horizon.
Yeah. If you were sitting on the antenna, you could see the plane. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just no real reason to think that. And also the pilots, said, we have the transcripts of the pilots talking to air traffic control, giving those DME markers as they're flying over them. So really, yeah, it would be nice if Tina Bar was under the flight path, but it ain't. And that's what we're stuck with. That's
the whole problem. I can't find any reason to believe that the flight path is wrong.
Yeah.
We know that the timing's there's something off a little bit about the timing, but we know about the jump because in the 302s, and you can tell me if they've been released or not yet. When we were in Seattle looking at the 302s, there was a lot of notes that were written by people that were monitoring the airwaves at the time.
Yep.
And they wrote down when he jumped, right? So there was a lot of personal notes, and they were all off by about a minute. But back then, we didn't have digital watches and stuff, right? Everything was analog. So I think that the jump time is constrained within a few minutes very well, too. So if you put the flight path and you say, okay, can't find anything wrong with the flight path. You say, okay, the jump time is within a couple of minutes, too. Then we pretty much know where he jumped. And then if you look at the fact there's no rivers that go from that zone down to Tina Bar, it creates the big Tina Bar mystery, which is ongoing today.
Yeah, I've often joked that we're going to be the Tina Bar mystery group if Cooper ever is found, right? It's just going to morph into that, because that really is, even apart from Cooper, that's a mystery that's completely separate mystery, right? And every new piece of information I dig up on this stuff just goes screwy, right? It just like, this doesn't help at all. No, you're making things worse, Tom.
I know. I hate it. Believe me. I've spent a lot of time on this thing. This money's been haunting me for more than a decade now. And every time, I've had some pretty cool things. We found out some pretty neat things about the money. I mean, I would have never thought there was only a single I would have thought there was a single rubber band around the bundles. And now I got to believe that there were two.
That's right.
And that's a fairly recent development. So that doesn't look like the money got reshuffled and then dumped on Tina Barr.
No, I think those are those ones were not reshuffled by Cooper. And again, as it's important to remember too, that you often see in the news reports $5,800. You'll see that in books. It was $5,800, but it was $6,000. Brian has said that they have accounted for the missing bits, essentially, that I believe in 2013 or 2014, Brian had them reanalyzed maybe by the auction house or something like that. And they found, I guess that would be 10 extra serial numbers or pieces of serial numbers. So it's the missing $200 was there. So it was $6,000. And also the shards. Yeah. And all the flakes and things, we love Bruce, but Bruce is obsessed with the shards. And really, to me, as I'm not a scientist, but the shards are just, it's the edges that flaked off.
So the shard field, first of all, if you're going to go excavate a site and you want to know what happened, you don't call the police or the FBI. You call an archaeologist, right? Or at least a paleontologist, right? You could have called me. You never dig a site the way the FBI did. They had a stake in the ground and they're digging a giant hole. They're spreading sand everywhere, right? So they dug a big hole in the ground looking for the gold at the bottom of the pit. That's not how you do it. Every archaeological show you've ever seen on TV, they grid it out. They all go down evenly. They sift everything out layer by layer by layer, and you can get a great picture of what's going on. The fact that they found a shard 3 feet down in the pit means absolutely nothing from my perspective, because the sand was falling back in the pit. Everything was going on. Everybody's walking in and out of the pit. Crazy.
Yeah. No, they had agents walking, literally in a row with shovels and rakes and things. Just, and then 2 days later, they get the Fazios on a backhoe, really digging down into the ground. I'm sure Palmer.
With Leonard Palmer. Yeah.
I'm sure Palmer being a scientist was probably like, eek, when he went out there. I'm sure.
Well, I've always said I give Palmer credit because he made the correct interpretation for the data he had at hand. But we now know that wasn't the way it was. So the only question in mind is how long is the money been buried, and that's something we could get an answer to if we bury money somewhere near Tina Barr and let it sit there long enough, right? Some people have buried some money, and I don't remember what the drop zone guys buried some money. And I never heard what happened to that. I've got some money that was buried in a jar in my lab in the Tina Barr sand, but it required me to kind of keep it wet all the time, and I wasn't good about doing that. And it shrunk up, but it certainly didn't rot away. I think you need a live situation to really rot the money.
Yeah, and hell, I'm guessing we have nothing but time. This hasn't been solved in 52 years, so somebody can do that. But that's the thing, is that it's interesting, in my research for my book, I determined that the FBI at the time, their actual best guess that they told the internal documents essentially say that their best guess was that it was, I believe in January of 79, there was a giant ice storm that basically froze the Columbia and made icebergs and things. And their idea was that, they had two different, in the FBI files, it's interesting, two different, I guess they're geologists or hydrologists for the Army, wrote in and said, hey, look, I think maybe it was pushed there by that, because they knew that the flight path was elsewhere, or when they crossed the river. And they said, maybe it got pushed there by ice last year. But of course, well, I don't know. I don't know if that discounts, your findings that it was summer diatoms, because maybe if it was ice just pushing it, maybe it didn't get, I guess it would have gotten wet. But yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, that's the problem. We have a lot of tantalizing clues. Tina Barr is a mystery in itself. It is a mystery, and nobody's written a book about Tina Barr yet, right? So don't worry about Cooper. Tina Barr could be its own book.
Yeah, it really could be, especially just some of the fun things about it. Well, like I said, the FBI, I don't think many people realize that the FBI's actual theory at the time was ice flow. They said, well, it's the only thing we can think of. They never in a gazillion years considered that Cooper buried it there himself. Sorry, Eric. That was not that was never a thought. Obviously, Well, I'd say what's interesting though about that is that you would think that they would have. In fact, I bet that most Cooperites who actually study the case probably think that the FBI changed their strategies after they found the money and started thinking, well, he must have died, right? Because why would a thief not be with his money? But no, they didn't. There was no drop off at all in so far as their investigation. This thing is they always investigated live people. The FBI was pretty. They could tell the media one thing, but as I always tell people, what were they going to say to the media? Well, shit, I guess he got away. No, they're going to say, well, crime doesn't pay, kids. Don't hijack planes. You'll die. So, but talking privately, as I've spoken to John Detler, who was there at the time in 71, and I said, what did you really think about it? He goes, well, we knew he lived within a couple of weeks when there was no, vultures, when there was no parachute spotted.
Came around to that, right? Because Larry was still saying that he died.
Larry's the only one, actually. Larry is the only one. Even Ralph Himmelsbach, Mr. Dirty Rotten Crook himself, Ralph was only 50-50. He went to his grave saying, well, I think it's 50-50. But Larry's the only one, actually, I've ever talked to. I've talked to about 6 of those guys now who thought he died, who actually was more probable than not that he died. But again, the issue is, if he died, how did the money get there, right? If there's unless somebody found a body in the woods and I suppose it's always possible that Cooper could have pulled a McNally and lost the money in the jump, and it went flying off somewhere, and somebody found the bag, and who knows? Because maybe, as I believe you and I are almost in agreement that money, that there was probably a superseding person, maybe, who got the money there, not Cooper, essentially. Like there was somebody maybe in between who got the money there. I don't know.
There's some story in between Cooper hitting the ground and the money on Tina Barr.
Right.
Yeah, it could be human intervention, but why would someone give up $6,000?
Yeah, and put it on. And why would anybody bury money? I remember at CooperCon, which that was the greatest thing. Being able to hang out with McNally was just almost surreal in a way, because you had a real DB Cooper like just hanging out with you. And
yeah, it was fun, and he could relate the story, boy. He was certainly the star of the show. We all enjoyed every minute with him, even though he's a criminal and all that. Some people had, were kind of a little bit disparaged about that, but he paid his debt to society, and boy, he was fantastic. Yeah, considering we've thought about this forever, you're right. He was a walking, talking Cooper.
No, and he's actually brought a lot of insight into the vortex. In being able to text, it's immensely valuable to be able to just send a text message to a Cooper, and to be able to text a real life Cooper and ask him questions. Like I was able to ask him, like for example, I had no idea until he told me, because it wasn't in any of the books that about him or magazine articles or newspaper articles, that he was wearing a suit like Cooper. Right. But he was wearing under his suit blue jeans and a polo shirt, because his thing was, I don't want to land on the ground looking like the skyjacker. Right. So he took his clothes off and threw them out the back before he jumped. Now, but don't believe Cooper did that, because Cooper had spent an hour and a half MacGyvering this bag to him wearing his suit. So he's not going to undo it and take his suit off. But so I do think Cooper landed on the ground with his suit, but McNally did not. And I always tell the funny story, Tom, that when they found his pants, so they did find McNally's pants the next day. They said, "Oh, it was such a dramatic jump that it blew the pants off the skyjacker." They thought that he had lost his pants. Which, it's always funny to read the early articles about McNally and these other hijackings, because with McNally, obviously he was such a doofus with his parachute. He had never even put one on, right? That the FBI said, we believe the hijacker was feigning ignorance. We think he was faking being dumb. But it's like, no, that was just Mac, because they were like, who would do this if he didn't know how to put on a parachute? We thought he was faking it. But that's McNally. So, okay. So some questions. Here's another question. What do you think about his bomb being real?
Hold on one second, hon. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Okay. What do you think about his bomb being real or not? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a couple things. Number one, if I had to guess either way, I'd say it wasn't real because it doesn't do them any good to have a real bomb. Carol, could you not do this? I can't hear when it's got the ice going. We have one big room here, and if something's going on in the other end of the room, you can't hear it. So I don't think there's any reason to have a real bomb. It would be just as effective as if it was fake, right? We understand. Do I remember that correctly? That there were red sticks in there. That the sticks were red.
Yeah. Tina said that they were the color of her uniform.
Yeah,
red.
So we also have some evidence that red is a rare color for dynamite. Usually it's brown and stuff like that. So given that fact, it would be unlikely. The other thing is we didn't find any explosive particles on his tie. Right? We're not seeing anything nitrogen based and stuff like that, which if he was actually handling real explosives and touching his tie, would have come out. We probably would have found something like that by now. So there were no explosive things on the tie. So, you can't say for real. He did sound like he had the right kind of formula with the battery. He had one of those giant batteries.
The D cells, yeah.
Sounds like he had some kind of blasting cap thing in there. So it sounds like he had kind of the right formula to make a bomb. So he's certainly smart enough to know what was going on. But I don't think the bomb was real. I don't think it was necessary.
Yeah, it didn't need to be real. Yeah, and also there's always the chance that it could just go off and kill everybody, and it kill you too. So, I mean, bombs are tricky things. And yeah, the difference though with him is that he certainly made it look convincing enough, which he didn't need to really. I mean, again, he could have just said he had a bomb and they would have done it. He didn't even have. I mean, he didn't even need to have a bomb. He could have just said he had a bomb.
But it fits his engineer motif, right? We know that this guy had to come from a pretty heavy manufacturing world, and he knew a bunch of things, right? He knew how to put the chute on. He knew about the flaps. He knew about all kinds of mechanical things like that. So for him to put together a pretty convincing looking bomb is kind of completely in line with everything we know about this guy so far.
Right. And the fact, as you said, right. And Cooper had divergent thinking, essentially. He was a divergent type of person to even think of this, although it could be that obviously Paul Sinney's hijacking was 13 days earlier. And so I do think Cooper got inspiration from that, but he obviously refined it to make it work. And he was a different guy. I just came across some quotes recently I just found some quotes and I had to put them in the book that I just never seen before from Radicek and Captain Scott, where they basically said he was as rational as anybody could be who was in that situation. They said, he was very rational. I think Scott's terms were calm and self-assured when they were talking to him. So he was pretty chilled out. So here's a question for you. Jamie's got a good question. He says, could the diatoms penetrate the bag?
So whenever he talks about diatoms, we want to talk about diatoms generically, right? Generic diatoms. Can generic diatoms do this? Can they go through sand? Can they go through the bag? Blah, 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 blah. Diatoms range from, in the diatom world, you have things that are the size of a human and the size of the Empire State Building, right? In terms of relative terms. Very big to very, very small in the diatom world. So if you ask me, could diatoms penetrate the bag? There are some versions of diatoms that might be able to get through the bag. Those are the same versions that can live in the sand among all the boulders that are the sand grains, right? And if those were the diatoms we were talking about, we would have a big problem. But we're not. We're talking about a diatom that looks like a Christmas ornament, and it's made of glass, and it's 10 times bigger, maybe 20 or 30 times bigger than the smaller diatoms that would live in the sand. Now, could that get through a bag, a hole, and then get into the money hole? No. It'd be 1,000,000 to 1 odds that would happen.
Okay, so that's not okay. So yeah,
you got to remember, diatoms is a bigger world than just that. There's hundreds of thousands of species of diatoms.
Wow.
But that's what makes them diagnostic, right? Because you look at the shape, you can say, okay, this is what this species is, and we know a lot about this species. So that's what makes it work.
Interesting. So here's a good question. This Anand says, could it be that summer species like Astronella and Fragilera? Tom, you read that, please. You read this. I just put it on the screen. Can you see that?
Okay. Could it be that summer species like Astronella and Fragilera are more resistant to decay than winter taxa? Well, that's a really easy question to answer. They're impervious to decay because they're made of glass. All right. So as fast as you're going to degrade a Coke bottle in the wild, you'll degrade a diatom.
Interesting.
Right? That's why diatomaceous earth is made up of diatoms that are millions of years old. Right. The White Cliffs of Dover, I think, don't quote me on this, I could be wrong, but like the White Cliffs of Dover, I think, are made up of diatoms.
Fascinating.
So diatoms fall to the bottom of the ocean, they accumulate in huge, thick layers. So that's the way they are. So no, you can't.
That's a damn good question, though. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm glad I got a clean answer for that one. Most answers are not so clean.
Right. Yeah. And so we've got, the one thing that really irked me that you found was no silt on the bills, which essentially, for those who are wondering, when floods, if you look at the muddy water in a flood, if you look at flood water, it's always murky and it looks horrible looking. And that's just all the dirt being churned up by the force of it. So you're going to have silt on flood water. So if it was pushed there by a flood, you would expect to have silt, correct?
You'd think especially silt particles are a zillion times smaller than diatoms. All right. So if we've got some scale of diatoms going on, if the Astronella for most of that we're talking about is 100 and a sand diatom is a 10, then a silt diatom would be 1,000th of a 1. It would be 0.001.
Wow.
Silt that's why you can't wash it out of your clothes and stuff and it gets in your hands, right? Because the particles are so small that you have a hell of a time getting rid of them. So there would be no resistance to silt getting anywhere a diatom could get, right? Because they're much smaller and they could follow in. And there's zillions more of them than there were of diatoms in the dirty water. Right. So, we tested it. I put Tina bar sand in a bucket and I filled it with water and I put fresh money stacked up in there and rinsed it around like it would, turbulence. And we found the silt. And then we looked Brian, thank you, Brian, if you're listening, we love you. Brian gave me those few pieces that were stacked together with several bills of a fragment. They're all stacked together. When I separated those fragments that had never been separated before, I didn't see any silt.
Yeah. So that really complicates things. That was the one that really, but again, I guess the issue is we always liked the flood theory, but again, you did a test of basically a pack that a 100 stack pack, and it sank. And then Chris Cunningham did a bundle of 3, which we think was how the money was given, in a bundle of 3 packets together, a strap on each side. And it sank in about 2 minutes in his bathtub. So money is not going to float.
Everybody was counting on the money to float downstream. I mean, that was for a long time. That was part of the equation, So it doesn't. Yeah, it's a better story to get picked up by the dredge, but the dredge can't process. The dredges are violent. If you put the thing through a dredge, you're not going to survive as a paper bill.
Oh God, yeah. In fact, that was one of the things I found doing when I was writing my Tina Bar chapter. Was I was looking at the dredge, and there's actually a 302 where they contacted the Corps of Engineers and asked them what kind of dredge they were using in ’74, and because I believe there are different dredges. There's some that go through pipes that eviscerate things as they go through, and then there's like big like claws that just grab dirt out of the ground. And this was the suction type that just has to go through a thing. And the engineers wrote the FBI. Well, the FBI they went and interviewed these engineers and wrote about it. They said, these engineers said, no way, that everything is just churn. I mean, every now and then something might get through, but there's no way they would all be together like that.
Yeah.
And
put it into a blender and then ran it
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just that they were it's not just that they weren't rendered asunder. It was that they were still together at all. Right. Is even remarkable.
Makes no sense. The only thing that would people have invoked was it still in the briefcase or was still in the bag or something like that,
Yeah.
So funny we haven't found the briefcase. If he tossed the briefcase or whatever, maybe he brought it with him. Maybe he was carrying the cash in the briefcase after he landed. But,
so the FBI, their belief was that, and this is the good thing about these FBI files is that you can actually see, now that we know, I really think about like the world that we inhabited in Cooper before the FOIA files and then after, it's like BC and AD really. It changes everything really. And we know now what they were thinking. The FBI, their thought was that Cooper, and kind of my thought too, is that he just chunked it out the back along with the dummy chute, because the dummy chute couldn't even clip to his parachute anyway. So he got rid of it. And that was actually what they got the Blackbird to go look for. Was they said, look for a briefcase in a field or whatever, or the dummy chute, because they said that's what's going to be. And they tried 5 times to fly over, and it was all, Pacific Northwest weather. It was overcast. They never got a good shot at it.
Crazy.
But
we found everything else out there. I mean, we found the panels. They find every damn thing. Found a couple of dead bodies from some other people.
Right.
You can't find the damn briefcase, right?
Well, I would say that
north of the aerial, it does get to be much darker Deathwoods.
Yes, and that's where we would have
jump a couple of minutes earlier. Maybe the briefcase is still out there.
Well, I always point to this. So Marty McNally also had a briefcase. He had his attaché case, and he chunked it out the back too. And they've never found it. And that was over farm country in Indiana where he jumped, and they never found it. So if I think that it's possible. I mean, the woods are big, especially like you said, basically south of like Tacoma and north of the Lewis River is along the flight path. A lot of it is like, that's the Weyerhaeuser, or what do they call it? The timberland up there.
Yeah. It's where Bigfoot lives.
Right. And so that's truly the middle of nowhere. So he could have just chunked it out there and it's never going to be. And look, here's the thing. I mean, not everybody knows about G.B. Cooper. Somebody could have come across that in 1987 and just kicked at it and kept walking. Right. And it probably would have shattered. I always remember like David Letterman throwing things off the buildings, right? Like, a briefcase is not going to just, if it hits the ground, it might shatter into a gazillion pieces, right? We don't know.
But it hit the trees first. I think it has more chance of surviving in the Deathwoods.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. And it could be out there. But as I say, McNally's was not found. And so we can't expect Cooper's to be found either. So, but the thing with no silt, though, because that takes away flooding. And that really irked Chris Cunningham a lot, because obviously Cunningham is a big proponent of the natural arrival theory. And he's like, oh, crap.
If I was going to argue against myself, I would say, well, Tom, you only looked at a little section of the stack of bills.
Yes.
If that was under the rubber bands, maybe it wouldn't have silt in it. Right.
Okay.
So I guess we could I could actually answer that question now, because I think we can figure out where on the bills Brian's stack came from. And we now know that there's 2 rubber bands.
All right.
Right. So we may be able to say whether or not that was under a rubber band stack or not.
Yeah, I always point out, I'll try to find the photograph. That there is a photograph that I will try to find that looks exactly, here it is. So this is the I forget which high, it might be Hetty or one of the copycats. This is their money, and that is basically that's bundled how we think it was bundled. In fact, Bill Grinnell, who was there at CooperCon last year, he believed that their bundles were actually in packets of 5. Essentially, it was 5 packets to a bundle, with a paper bank strap. We do know that they had paper bank straps because they contacted the bank the next day and said, "What did the money look like?" They said, "Well, it was rubber banded and it had paper bank straps on it." So, but that money right there is from a hijacker in '72, and that's probably what Cooper's money is going to look like. It's pretty cool photograph there, and
$20 bills too.
It is, exactly. So that's why I like that photo. It looks very Coopery. But see, there's there's the other thing that's really that troubles us, is there's always with Cooper, we always get so close to an answer that we need even, and then it's like, for example, we assumed for the longest time that Cooper's money would have been in perhaps a 3-packet bundle, because that's what was at Tina Bar essentially.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
But then you talk to the guy who was there, and he goes, "It was 5." He was like, "It was our standard procedure at Seattle to do it in 5-packet bundles, like that big picture was." And so it's like, oh, great. Now what does that mean for Tina Bar? I don't know. Maybe nothing.
Yeah, but this was not standard procedure, because they put this money away in the vault for these types of occasions.
Yeah.
That would have been non-standard procedure.
Yeah,
so
and it was
definitely. I believe it would be different. Could be different.
Well, and see, we're talking about the money now. The thing about it, but that the money that's really, and I've got the pictures I'm going to bring up here with the rubber band stuff that you did. That is the one that it's weird because people will say rubber bands are going to disintegrate immediately, or they don't, or they do.
Not immediately. I mean, it takes months.
Well, what's interesting about that though is as long as they're dry, it seems like they can last or maybe preserve somehow.
It's not dry because if they sit on the doorknob in your kitchen, they rot on your doorknob. Right?
Well,
it's the oxygen. If you get oxygen, oxygen binds with the sulfur and takes the sulfur out of the rubber band, and that's what rots the rubber band.
Right. Well, they certainly wouldn't be elastic anymore. That's for sure.
Well, that's where it loses. That's why Brian had rubber bands stuck to the money, but they crumbled off. So they're elastic. The sulfur makes it elastic. All right. So they had lost all their elasticity. They get gummy when they do that, and then they just dehydrate or whatever they do, and it becomes stuck to the money. So Brian's explanation is perfect for what you'd expect rubber bands to do in a bundle that was sitting undisturbed for a long time.
Did they just flake off, basically?
Yeah, it would stick and flake off. Yeah.
Right, which is basically what we're looking at here on this photograph. The one that's at 234 days. Is this submerged, or
yes.
was this?
These were all submerged. Yes.
Okay.
So one of these was submerged in a creek by my house in Arizona. Another one was submerged in underneath a tray of sand out in the Portland area. It was being watered constantly. And then the other one was, I don't remember where the other one was. I think maybe that was also in the creek by us, but I pulled it out earlier. So yeah, this is what you'd expect. And this kind of follows what the kind of literature says for this kind of thing too, that rubber doesn't last this long. And the reason why we stretched them at different stretches, right? You see that there's stair step on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So each of them is stretched to a different breaking point, basically. And you can see the harder they're stretched, the quicker they rot and go away.
Right. And I've got a photograph here that I'm going to pull up that I actually sent to you on Facebook recently. It was this interesting photograph here that they found this money recently. Well, it was not in 2020. I found this article. This money was just buried behind somebody's house, and they found it doing construction work, and it had been buried in 93 and unearthed in 2020. So 27 years later, it still actually has the rubber bands there holding the money together, and it was just buried. Now, it looks like I can't tell in this photograph, but it looks like maybe at the bottom there, maybe it was in a plastic bag of some sort, perhaps.
That's what it looks like, but yeah, right. Maybe they brought it in the plastic bag.
Right. That's a good point too. Obviously, the Ingrams brought their money in a hot dog bun bag that they put the money in.
It doesn't make sense that this would be buried straight away in dirt, because there's the top surface of that thing is very white, like you'd expect fresh bills to be. If it was buried in the mud for a long time, that wouldn't be white.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, I had to research that more, but that's interesting though. At least the rubber bands are still there after 27 years.
Yeah, in a bag, it would make sense because you're preventing oxygen from getting in. The bag prevents oxygen from getting in the rubber bands. Now, I don't think they're still elastic. They are probably just barely holding that thing together, or they maybe all the bills may have welded together. It may still be wet. We know that when they get wet, they turn into a brick.
Right. Well, so how do you explain? I mean, again, I'm asking you to explain this, but we have diatoms, but we have no silt. So we have got clean water immersion, I guess. How does that make sense at all?
Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't. Right. Somebody please make Tina Bar go away. I'll be a happy guy.
Yeah, I don't understand how it could get wet in non-flood. That's submerged, not just wet. I mean, the bills all of them were waterlogged, correct?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. We've only looked at the one bill. Well, we saw the few. We've looked at more than one bill, but we by no means looked at all of them, right? But right. It's certainly very reasonable to assume that the story I'm telling is correct. It's reasonable to assume that.
Right. Well, and here's some controversy here is these black bills here. You think that those are from post emergence testing?
Yeah, I don't think I'd be 90% sure.
Right.
So when we originally saw these pictures, this is when we initially got in contact with Larry Carr. Things are going back and forth about what bills to look at, what to analyze, that type of thing. We were most excited about the black bills because they were rare, right? So if it's rare, that means there's something unusual about them, or something unusual maybe can tell you some part of the story. So the original theory was that these were the bills that were on the top and the bottom, and they turned black from immersion in the sand over a long period of time. And that could probably tell us something. So when I first put the chunks of these black bills in the electron microscope, the black coating was made up of silver. There was silver in the black coating. And that was really weird, right? How could you get silver to accumulate? Remember, we're thinking that this accumulated on the bills. So I started doing a bunch of research. Is there silver in the Columbia River? Turns out there is. There's mining stuff going on upstream. And I started looking at what kind of chemical processes could deposit silver on the bills. And I'm going through all these gyrations, right? What the public that's listening to this podcast right now is what you don't see is all the dead ends and all the hair pulling and all the crazy stuff that we do to finally get to an answer. Because the primary answer does just not pop out and tell you, here I am, right? You got to look down a lot of damn rabbit holes before you find one with a rabbit in it. So in this case, I was going down all the rabbit holes trying to find out how to get silver deposited on a piece of linen. And my colleague at the time, Alan Stone, who's a metallurgist, happened to talk to a guy who was a FBI agent and said, oh yeah, back then we used to use silver nitrate to look for fingerprints on stuff. Silver nitrate. Okay. So now I got to test for silver nitrate. Well, what you can do is you can get a nitrate test from the pool store, right? It's just a dip thing. You wet it and you dip it. And I wetted this thing and I put it up against the black bill, and there was nitrates all over the thing, right? It was silver nitrate. So 90-some%, because I can never tell you 100% sure because somebody's going to come back and argue with me. But I would feel extremely comfortable saying that they checked those bills using silver nitrate. And for those of you who are listening and don't know, silver nitrate is the stuff they use on black and white pictures. And if you expose it to light, it turns black. All right. Then you have to kill it with another formula to make it prevent the whole thing to go black. So what they would do with silver nitrate and fingerprints is they would put the silver nitrate on, and the fingerprint grease would react first with the silver nitrate. So the fingerprints would show up first, and they'd be waiting with the camera. And the minute they saw the fingerprint, they take a picture, and then the rest of the thing turns completely black. So that's what they did. They checked a couple of bills for fingerprints, which you'd expect the FBI to do in a desperate situation.
Sure.
To figure out who this guy was.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Unfortunately, the black bills are completely useless for our purposes, but they were a heck of a story.
Story. I mean, we've got the 302s where they sent the money to Quantico, I guess, for the crime lab to test for fingerprints, and they were, like you said, they were desperate.
2008, when we were looking at all this stuff, you guys, and we looked at the 302s. We spent 3 days with the 302s. We had 3 people looking through the volumes. There's multiple volumes of 302s. Some have duplicate information, some don't. And I don't know if that's sorted out when you guys are getting these releases, which volume this stuff is coming from. But there were 3 volumes, 302s, this thick of stuff. And we tried to compare them, and we couldn't because they weren't quite, they had a lot of repeat information, but not quite. And a lot of the stuff that's coming out from these releases, we never even saw. I mean, this stuff about the money, have we seen that in the 302s? We said right off the bat, boom, okay, that explains the black stuff. But that's where it's at. And right. Even the SR-71 overfly, that was a single line that we read in the 302. It happened to be in the beginning of the 302. That's how we saw it. And now you're coming up with this other information. There were 5 different flights, and it was a weather problem. They wanted to look for the briefcase and all that stuff. We never saw that, even though we had complete access to the 302s.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of information in there we just didn't get to. Had we had to do it again, we would have photographed every single page. But
yeah, I mean, it's been a marvelous thing. I may do a live stream next month or something during the next vault release. I may do a live stream where I just mirror. I do a screen mirror, and I just go through. I do what I do every time one of these comes out every month. I just go through and page by page kind of look and see what I can see, because there are a lot of duplicates, as you said, because a lot of these documents, anything that they sent to any office, outside office, is going to be in there. And so a lot of times they sent the same document to 5 different offices. So there's 5 different documents in the, showing what they sent to each place. And it's a lot of redundancy there in the 45,000 files that we have so far. But yeah, they definitely sent the money over to the crime lab. The tie, if we can transition into the tie, obviously the tie was sent to the crime lab too, which was interesting back in 70. I guess it was not long after, I think it was early 72. They sent the tie to look for saliva or fluids on it, and they didn't find anything at the time, and they sent it back. Which I believe we did some research. Maybe you or somebody mentioned it. Maybe I did the research that to see if they could have pulled blood back then and found blood type, and I think they could have back then. I believe that if they had found blood on there, they could have lifted it from the fabric and tested it somehow. But I don't know. But there was no blood, no fluids, no spit on the tie, whatever. So speaking of the tie, though, how do you account for, can you explain why the UV and the laser fluorescence analysis from 2011 that you did indicated a large amount of residue from matches and smoking, but the recent Macron analysis have called that into question, with basically no particles associated with smoking. So what's the...
Well, the fluorescence doesn't necessarily tell you that there were match particles all over, right? And I checked the fluorescence on some match particles, and some of them are fluorescent, some of them aren't. But you can't say, okay, look, it's fluorescing, that means match particles, which is one of the problems with fluorescence. I'm trying to solve that problem right now. But you can't be diagnostic on that. We have a match particle database from the FBI. It's called the SLICE database, and it has 200 profiles of matches in it, elemental profiles of the matches. Yeah, a lot of them. First of all, the variety that you see is crazy, all right? But there's always some kind of a flammable material in there, and we see a lot of that type of thing on the tie, right? So he was a smoker. I don't see a lack of those kinds of particles. What those particles were, I can't recall off the top of my head right now. It's been a while since we looked into that. But there's basic ingredients in matches. There's different ones in blue tip matches than book matches. So I would still go with the preponderance of evidence shows he was smoking on the plane. Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff on the tie knot. Right. So he had stuff on his fingers. And if you're striking a match, lighting your cigarette, putting your tie on, which you can completely see him doing that in the morning, you'd get that stuff on your tie, So I don't think he's a non-smoker. And I think some of the stuff is pointing back towards smoking here recently. So the Macron data is up in the air right now. We're in the middle of discussing a lot of things with Macron. I think I've talked about this on the forum. We are going to send at least one or more of the stubs in for a reanalysis. They reprocessed the old data, and the particles came out with a lot more oxygen in them. So, again, you have to ask Chris Broer about this. He's got the better numbers than I do. But I think 65% of the particles in the original analysis, so we have a single stub, the Macron original particles from that analysis showed 65% oxygen. The reanalysis of the same particles shows 95% oxygen.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's a tremendously higher quantity of oxygen, which knocks out a lot of potential metals. All right, so Eric has been looking through this, and he's come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with the oxygen detection, which it's hard to say that it's false or it's wrong, because the way the system works, I have a system too, is it actually has to detect something to tell you that oxygen is there. But to Eric's credit, he kept digging, and this is what anybody could do. That's why you all should be looking at these particles. And he found in the new batch, there was even gold that had oxygen associated with it.
Hmm.
All right. So that doesn't make sense. So I have not gone back to Macron to ask about this yet. We are now currently, the pictures, they sent us pictures of the particles. And we find out now from talking with Macron. Macron has been fantastic. I got to tell you, I've had 50 to 100 emails between us and Macron. That never happens, right, with these guys usually.
Great.
Usually they brush you off right away. Macron is very dedicated to this, and I really appreciate it. And that's why I will not release any other information of who I'm talking to over there, because if the vortex gets to that guy, we'll ruin this connection, just like it happened with Larry Carr, right? We lost Larry Carr because some idiot on the outside tried to push some buttons in the wrong places and everything got ruined. So let's keep this Macron thing open. Let me handle it. So getting back to the particles. They sent us pictures, and embedded in the picture is the elemental profile of what the data, the raw data is, right? So we didn't know this. We didn't know that the raw data was embedded in the pictures. I now found the correct software to extract the raw data out of these pictures, and we can now look at the peaks. I've shown you in the talk that you get peaks of stuff. So the next thing that happens is we're going to look at which of these, like the gold particles got oxygen. We're going to extract the raw data, and we're going to look at that spectrum and see if there's oxygen in the spectrum, what could be wrong. I'm trying to do a little background analysis before I approach Macron. Macron is making a big point that the study that they did in 2017 is ancient history compared to what they could do today. All right. But the fact that these things got a lot more oxygen particles is kind of putting a little crack in the foundation there. So we'd like to get an answer to that. And then we're going to have them rescan one of the stubs. We do expect that when we rescan the stubs, we're going to get a completely different set of data. There will be some overlap in the particles, but we know that they did not get all the particles. So one of the options we may have, and we haven't approached Macron about it yet, is we have an X amount of money. We have about $2,000 to do this study with. We're going to ask them, can we really turn up the knob on this thing and get like all the particles and do a longer analysis? They only analyzed each particle for half a second. All right. So they went bam, 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 and went through these particles as quickly as they could. When I analyze a particle, I let it sit there and grind on one particle for half an hour. For half an hour. There's a big difference. And you get much cleaner data. You're beating down the noise is what you're doing. So we don't know yet if this oxygen stuff has to do with the noise problem or what it's doing. There's other couple of ways you can analyze it by creating a synthetic spectrum and seeing if that matches your spectrum. But looking at some of the spectrums, we've identified some of the peaks on some of the materials that are within the noise, and you would discount them if you were looking at them on my electron microscope versus a half-second exposure on theirs. So there's nothing that they did wrong, certainly, but we need to dive into the specifics of what's going on. And this time, we're basically loading the gun to get a fantastic shot at the next scan. By the time we send in this stuff and they scan the next stuff, we'll know exactly what's going on. We'll have a history on this thing. I expect we're going to get a lot of great particles out of this, and we're going to find out some new stuff. So that's where we're at. You know, we've got there's a whole particle team now working on this stuff. I'm in the field right now. I'm in Wyoming. I'm away from my lab, all that stuff. And so my brain's in another place right now. So I'm counting on these guys to kind of pick up the slack. But we're going to be getting down probably this coming week here and figuring out what these elements look like. So that's the story.
Well, that could be pretty obviously, you know, I am prepared for it to be like, oh, well, the new analysis indicates he was a circus clown because, you know, it's XYZ. You know, you're always upending everything, Tom. So
I can tell you this reanalysis just points harder at the fact he was in the engineering world.
Okay.
There's nothing sideways on this thing.
Good.
Right? The reanalysis of the old particles, even though it's got a lot of oxygen in it, is not pointing toward anything other than engineering. Right. So thank God. All right. Thank God.
Yeah, because
probably I'm going to bite my tongue when the new analysis comes in. It is probably going to be circus clown makeup. Right.
Right. Well, like that was my first thought when they said more oxygen. I said, oh crap, because that would make me think that there's less metal. Right. But you're saying it looks more like does it look more like research metals, or does it look like just engineering in general.
Yeah, well, we're finding, again, I don't want to usurp Eric on this, but he's finding out that oxygen particles were part of metallurgy, too. So he'll probably do something on this. I'm kind of holding everybody back. I probably even should have said what I've already said, but we were trying to lay some groundwork. So the groundwork that's going on right now is we're looking into powdered metallurgy and trying to figure out if that's part of what we're seeing on the tie.
Powdered metallurgy?
Powdered, yeah, it's a very common thing. You take powder and you smash it and then you heat it and you create a metal thing. It's like putting it into a mold. You smash powder into a mold, you heat it up and it becomes metal, and now you pop it out of the mold.
I tell you, the things that what's interesting about the case is that it really shows how all this discussion we're having really puts into perspective the disadvantages that the FBI had because this is such a this was so out of their comfort zone.
Totally.
That
yeah. They got from what our understanding is, they got their first electron microscope in 71. Right.
Right.
So they had no clue. I mean, they're just looking and saying, what do I do with this giant expensive thing? Right. They didn't even know how to use it at that point.
Well, and again, they had no idea what DNA was. So it's unfair really to criticize them for that because, it'd be like somebody in 50 years saying, oh, they didn't know about brainwave stuff. How stupid. Well,
I've always said the FBI did the best possible job they could. They spent a lot of time on it. You can see it from the 302s. How many thousands of pages? That's a lot of damn manpower. A lot of
80,000 pages. About 80,000.
How long would it take you to write an 80,000 page book?
I can't even imagine. It's a lot. It's a whole lot that they've got. But just the disadvantage is again, the FBI generally do bank robberies and things like this. But this is a sky robbery. It involved all the flight path, drop zone stuff. It involved parachutes. It was a lot of different things that they had to outsource to people because they didn't know. I mean, I often think about it that really there's no difference. I'm not gonna say there's no difference in myself and FBI guys, but FBI guys back then were accountants and lawyers, and a lot of them still are. That's who J. Edgar Hoover wanted. Sure. And they're just guys like us just working a case. And really what's interesting about using the 302s is that basically the problem with Cooper is they had to wait for leads to come into them. They could not be proactive because there was no evidence to be proactive with. So the entire case was just waiting for the right phone call to come. And if that phone call never comes, you're never going to catch the guy. So it was kind of a troubling reality that they had to deal with. There's a great quote on the 5th year anniversary from the head of the FBI in Seattle, who said, "We have now nothing more than we had 5 years ago," which is just a great big nothing. Basically saying there's just nothing. We don't have anything. Tina Barr was really
Larry. When you talk to Larry, you'll understand how the bar has to be set, right? If you ask any one of us in the Vortex, there's been a tremendous amount of progress made on this case. Tremendous. If you ask Larry or another FBI agent like Larry, he says, "What do you got for me that I can convict somebody on?"
That's right.
We have zeros on what you can convict somebody on. Well, so that's from that standpoint. Yes, we have done nothing. We have done nothing at all. Well,
somebody could. Literally, DB Cooper's 95-year-old wife could walk in and say, "Hey, my husband was Cooper," and they would go, "Well, that's great. How can you prove it?" Literally, it could be the real DB Cooper's wife saying, I was in on it. I did this and that and this and that and this. And they would go, "Well, that's great and all. But what do you have?" Because it still has to be, they have to have, in the legal world, it's actionable evidence. Right. And so.
Right. So from Larry's perspective, we haven't gotten anywhere. I don't think Larry thinks of us that way. I think Larry's hanging around because this is fun for him too. But, from our standpoint, we have a lot of details that we've coagulated out of the mist here. And we know more things about what's going on. Now, Tina Barr, we made a lot of progress on Tina Barr. It isn't getting us anywhere. But Cooper himself, we've got him narrowed down. He's narrowed down to within a couple thousand people at best. That's huge progress no matter how you look at it. Because if you had talked to somebody in 2007, he could have been any 40-year-old white guy in the whole country. Now you can't just bring me any 40-year-old white guy because I'm going to start asking you questions. Where do you work? What do you do for a living? And if you don't believe in the tie, then there's millions of people that could be Cooper. But if you do believe in the tie, we've got them localized.
Well, and I like the fact when people bring up the thrift store angle, the fact is that it appears, and you've seen the tie up close. For some reason, I do believe in the FBI in evidence, they have kept the tie clip and the tie. They're separate pieces of evidence, and they'll put them on for show. But I believe that they've said that there's pretty good indication that the tie clip was on the tie for a while before it was.
But something else is on the tie because we see the hole where the tie tack was.
Right. And that's the thing is, I mean, they're not going to sell a damaged tie at Goodwill or whatever. I mean, and again, it costs $1 at the store.
There's gold from the tie clasp on the tie too in that zone.
Okay. So
we know there's gold particles that rubbed off the tips of the tie clasp.
Now, do you think that big spot, is that a burn or is that something else?
Some people want to say it's a burn. I think it's a hole. Just a hole with a divot around it. But
a hole from what? Just anything or
tie
tack? Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So let's see. Jay says, has anyone ever done a test to what happens to money and a person if no pull? Well, that'd be a hard test to make. But I guess
we need volunteers.
Yeah. Who need volunteers? I mean, I've seen, I remember a particularly chilling image I found one time of a World War I Zeppelin pilot. A German pilot jumped out of his Zeppelin because it was on fire, and the photograph is of the indention he made on the grass. It's like pretty gross. It's like, oh wow. So it's pretty tough. But yeah, if he's a no pull, then
how'd the money get to Tina Bar?
Yeah, and again, I wish I had it pulled up here, but him being a no pull is just so minuscule. The odds are just ridiculous. I believe that I wish I could find. I should have it on me, but it was like I looked up the accidents in like the 1970. The closest I could find was 1970 U.S. Parachute Association, like fatalities, and it was something like 13 of, I mean, couple million or something. It was crazy. Safe how safe skydiving was. You would think. You'd think it'd be more dangerous than that, but it's not. And then you say, well, okay, he was jumping at night out of a jet. Well, okay, I ran the numbers, and even at like 100 times more dangerous than a regular skydiving jump, it's still like he was like 99.997% likely to live.
Yeah, the odds were in his favor. Even when we thought the odds were stacked against him, the odds were still in his favor.
Well, and now we know that the parachute he jumped with was actually a pretty good parachute to do that with. It was for people who were spinning out of control, people who had never made jumps before. They're emergency packs for people who don't jump out of planes. You look at like in World War II, literally, I mean, unless they were repeat offenders, none of the 20-year-olds who jumped out of B-17s had ever jumped out of a plane before, and they almost all lived. So, in fact, I would imagine almost all of them lived. I know Andrade's done testing on that too. So I don't really see that, but that's interesting. So let's just say, here's the question: based on all the evidence, we're kind of going into this again, but we just discussed this. But based on all the evidence Tom has seen, including the tie particles, what would be his best guess as to a line of work, occupation, profession for the hijacker?
So, I've been saying this for quite a while. Because he wore a tie, we know he's in the manufacturing world. All right. I think we can agree on that based on the number of crazy metal stuff that's on the tie. If you're in the manufacturing world and you're wearing a tie, you're either an engineer or management. So he is management. Now, based on the smears that I reported at the last CooperCon, we know that this guy went out into the back room where everything was dirty and greasy and was grabbing stuff with his hands and then touching his tie. That's the only way you get hundreds of aluminum particles smeared into a tie. So you can imagine that this guy was very hands-on. This guy was very hands-on guy. He knew what he was doing. He knew his way around machinery. And that also goes with the idea that I can get on this plane, I can open up the door, and I can jump down. That was not a foreign world to him to be able to open a door or put on a parachute or any of that, right? So he also cut apart the parachute in a very short period of time. And he cut each knot individually. There's like 20 knots. There's a knot for each of the cords that goes up to the parachute. I don't know how many cords there are, maybe 20. And they're all individually tied to a backbone in the thing. He cut through each of those knots in how many minutes from when he took off to when he jumped.
That's so
and
strange.
why he did that, we still don't know. But yeah, he did that. Maybe he was trying to make enough room for the money. Who knows? But this guy could handle mechanical stuff. He built the bomb, right? He put wiring and a switch and all. Like you said, he didn't have to go that far. He could have just said, "I got a bomb in my suitcase. Shut the hell up. It's the land.
Yeah.
We're going. I'm telling you." But he had the wherewithal to put all these pieces together like it was nothing. So this guy is a very mechanical, very well read in the world of mechanical stuff, type of engineer. I think management usually is a little less sophisticated about these things. I think this guy is probably more of an engineer, but either of those would suffice. So that's where I think we're at. And now if you say, well, he had titanium on the tie, well, now you're talking about a guy who, engineer or a manager who was exposed to titanium shavings. That's a really small world in 1971. That's a really small world compared to where we were with D.B. Cooper. So bring me a suspect that you can put these particles on the tie, and don't give me jet exhaust and all that stuff, right? We've already looked at the jet exhaust thing. The particles that are coming out, yes, have a lot of titanium and stuff in them, but they're too small even for my microscope to see, my electron microscope to see. So we need something that's a little different than that. So, but good thinking. I'm not saying don't do it, but bring me a guy who can get these particles on the tie, and we'll be really close. The Vince Peterson and that whole thing, I don't know for sure that it's Vince Peterson, but I know that we're in the neighborhood. I really like the neighborhood that we're in with the specialty research metallurgy thing, where they do a lot of different metals and they're going through a lot of crazy concoctions to make different metals. That's a really, really good world to be in. So I think we can feel the heat from the zone where Cooper's in right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am obviously going to write a book eventually about the copycats and, all that type of stuff, but it's hard to do a 1-to-1 on Cooper because he's different. He's a little different. It's kind of his idea. It's not, I'm not going to say it's his idea originally, but he perfected it much better than Cini.
He did it with the best flair.
Yes. Yeah. It was, he knew, I think he saw Paul Cini saying, "Oh, I guess you could jump out of a plane with ransom. I'll do that." And did it 13 days later. There's no reason to think he planned this for more than.
If you take it from that perspective, then he put the whole thing together in 13 days.
Yeah, and I think he did.
That's pretty spur of the moment.
And that's my opinion that he did. I have thought about that pretty extensively. I don't think that there's anything that needed to be more than 13 days. Really, what would you need to? I think
first thing you do is you'd have to do a little bit of research, make sure you can lower the air stairs and that. So did the previous guy have air stairs?
No, Cini was on a DC-8 that he was going to jump out the side.
Okay. So he did a little bit of research on the air stairs, right? If we think he got on a 727 on purpose. So that would take you a little bit. Then you have to pull the stuff together, right? You have to pull the bomb stuff together. And then you have to find the flight that you like. And remember, he didn't want to jump at night, right? We all talk about, oh, he's jumping at night. He didn't want to do that, right? He got way delayed, right? The whole thing was off timing and put him into the night after all the delays happened. He was trying to make hurry up, get the fuel. Doesn't take forever to get the money, all that stuff. He was not planning on jumping in the middle of the night. He was planning on jumping during the day.
Yeah, I might disagree there, Tom, because I would say that if he was from the area, he would know that it gets dark at 4:00 in the afternoon in November, and he's hijacking it.
Then why would he rush to get if he wanted to go at night? Why would he rush to have the fuel put on board?
Well, I would say the whole reason is that he's most vulnerable on the ground, right? That's the only time he's vulnerable. So he's like, Cooper didn't want to be on the ground. That's why he said, "I want everything ready when we land," right? He was trying to minimize his ground time.
Well, but then he'd be off and running, and he'd be taking off, and he'd have to jump. He'd have to jump within X amount of minutes after leaving. And if he left in the day, if everything went according to plan and he left, he would still be light out. He'd be jumping during the day. Now, I can argue with you, because you're a great guy to argue with. I'll argue that he didn't think about being on the ground because he didn't think anybody would know when he left the plane. He'd think that he'd have a 3,000 or 1,000-mile corridor, which they'd be looking for him. And it'd be low odds for them catching him if they didn't know when he left. It was coincidental that they happened to know when the pressure pulse came through the cabin that was.
Oh boy! If it was not for the pressure bump, I guess it wouldn't make a difference. We still wouldn't know who the guy was. But could you imagine if it was like he could have jumped anywhere between Seattle and Reno? My God, that would be a nightmare. Although I guess the Tina Bar money still would have been like, oh, I think that would have made people think he jumped sooner.
Well, that would have localized it. Yeah, we could have
Yeah.
used the Tina-Bar money to localize it to that section of the Northwest. He certainly didn't jump at Reno. The stuff ends up at Tina-Bar.
Right. And you were discussing earlier about the time. The thing is, we kind of know roughly when Cooper jumps. And the issue with that, though, is that where the FBI went wrong and why we don't think, for all who don't know this, who are listening, why we don't think anymore, most people don't think that Cooper jumped near Ariel where they thought he jumped, was because that is where the plane was at 8:11. All right. Now at 8:11, roughly around then, is when Bill Radachek he just announces to the Seattle Tower, whoever he's talking to. He says, we're experiencing oscillations in the cabin rate of climb indicator. They're not feeling anything. They're just seeing it on their gauge.
I saw the gauge, yeah.
Right. They saw the gauge mixing. And that's at 8:11. Now, we know now from interviews that Georgia did and that other people have done that it was essentially, they said, well, we saw the oscillations, called it in, and we were discussing it amongst ourselves for a few minutes. And then the pressure bump happened, right? So we know now it's actually, but see, for whatever reason, I don't know why, because it's like, Harold Anderson was involved. He was on the plane. He was in the sled test. Why didn't somebody tell Paul Soderlund, who was the guy who did all this, say, look, actually it was, because like I said, they thought the oscillations were Cooper jumping when really it was almost certainly him walking down the stairs. And
well, there's something that doesn't jive there, because the people listening, monitoring the airways at that time, just Joe Blow was talking about 8:10, 8:11 when they said he left the plane.
Right. And
so the oscillations wouldn't have stimulated some guy listening to the thing to say he left.
Well, but right after Radachek said oscillations, he said, we think he's doing something with the stairs. So I think was their, and also too, they did call eventually and say, we did feel something a few minutes ago, but they didn't call right away and say we felt something minutes ago. And we have, like I said, we have Harold Anderson saying it was a few minutes later. And so that's why, Larry, as early as 2007, said that he thought it was, give or take a couple minutes after the oscillations. So it puts him jumping at 8:13, 8:14, which is down near Orchards, which really is, it's interesting. And I've said this a million times, and forgive me, people listening, but I spoke to a pilot who famously, the Robert Rackstraw grift, they love the story about this plane that was flying overhead in the drop zone area the night of the hijacking. Okay. Well, I actually found out who that was, and I gave the guy a call. His name is Bob McClellan, and he's 80 something years old. He was flying around the time. He was a local pilot, and that was him. And thankfully, to the FBI files, I can figure out who it was using the FBI files. And it was him. So I called him. He goes, "Oh yeah, that was me." The FBI they damn near raided his house. It was a big thing. And his wife, he was an engineer in Vancouver and would fly to work from La Center.
Really?
Because there was an airfield right next to where he worked. So he would just fly to work and walk across the street to where he worked. He would skip the traffic, he said, which is pretty cool. Nice. But he said that he had just bought a clunker of a plane and he was circling that night, or it was actually the night before. It wasn't the night of the jump. These old ladies who were all panicky told the FBI it was the night of the hijacking, but it wasn't. It was the night before.
Really?
He was circling around, waiting for his wife, because he had an airstrip on his front yard, and he was waiting for his wife to turn on the headlights of her car so he could land. And that's why he was circling around. But I asked him though. I said, "Look, you were obviously flying in 71. I said, let me give you a scenario: 10,000 feet." Cloud cover at 5,000, 2,500 and 1,500 feet. If you're flying south on V23, when would you have started to see the lights of Portland, Vancouver? And he said about Woodland, roughly. No, I'm wrong. He said around Battleground. He said around Battleground you'd start to see it.
Yeah, pretty
which
close.
Is roughly where we think now, a little further south than Ariel is Battleground Orchards. Yeah. And that lines up with when you're first seeing the lights. And that kind of made me go, And also I asked him, I said, what was the first, if you're flying overhead back then, what was the first town that in a triple cloud cover gave off enough light for you to be able to look down and see a town of some sort? He said, probably Battleground as well. And so really from talking to McNally, you know, Mac jumped where he jumped because he said he was thinking, he was looking out, he was going, okay, I don't want to jump in the middle of complete nowhere because I'll be really in the middle of nowhere, but I don't want to jump in a town because I could land on a cop car, you know. So I want to like
see him, yeah.
Yes, I want to have a good like medium area, right? And I think that if Cooper, obviously he knew the geography of the area. We know he saw Tacoma from the air, and all. He was. I mean, I don't know if he was a local, but he knew the geography enough. And really the geography is not complicated up there. Really, it's Seattle, and then there's Portland. You know, and there's just,
if you're looking for lights, it's not complicated at all.
No. And so obviously, if you're looking for lights, he's going to dead reckon. Okay, I've been in the air 30 minutes. We're heading south. He may have even had a compass with him. If he was smart, he had a compass in his mystery bag or in his pocket, right? He knows they're flying south. He goes, okay, it's been 30 minutes. I'm going to look and see. And Mac even said that he got to the bottom of the stairs and could look around and look forward at the bottom of the stairs. I guess his goggles allowed him to do that. So it's possible that Cooper gets to the bottom of the stairs and is looking around and he sees, okay, there's some lights below me. And I see Portland in the distance. There's only one metropolis in the area, right? It's Portland. So I know what that is. That's Portland coming up. So he's going to jump there because if he jumps any later, there's a giant river up ahead and there's a big city up ahead. So I just feel like it's possible. I have a theory that maybe having talked to McClellan, the pilot, that Cooper was looking at lights.
I'll give you some variation on where the jump point was, but I still like the flight paths, right? I see no reason to find any error with the flight path, but yeah, you can convince me that there was some other jump point.
And there's no way to even, like I said, there's that. Yeah, the flight path's fine. Well, and that's the thing. And I've always wondered about that. So we talk about Cooper, like it's interesting. The other copycats, they actually gave specific, a couple of them, or three of them, three of the five who jumped, they gave specific degrees to follow even. I mean, they were very specific about where they wanted the pilots to fly because really it didn't matter. I mean, it's not like they were going to lose the plane. I mean, there were going to be chase planes. I mean, the issue wasn't where the plane was. It was when you jump, right? So Cooper would have suffered no disadvantage by telling them to fly Victor 23. That's what always irks me about Cooper kind of nonchalantly saying, okay, well, fly to Reno, right? I mean, I guess he assumed that to get to Reno, you're going to fly past Portland anyway. But that's still an assumption that he made that could have killed him, perhaps, if he wasn't really aware.
Well, Cooper may have been one of those guys that's really smart about a few things and then not smart at all about other things. You know, you see people like that. They're very sharp in another area, and then they just take everything else for granted.
Well, I mean, consider this, Tom. And I don't think I've had this discussion with you or brought this up. This was something I thought about a year ago. I started thinking, I was like, what in the hell was he doing? The fact is, Cooper, one of his demands was, I want the money in a knapsack, right? I want it in a knapsack and a book bag, basically. A school book bag is what he was talking about. And the idea almost certainly being that he was going to wear it front ways, like a baby papoose, and put his chute on over it, right? Because that way it's not going anywhere, right? So it's in the front. Yeah. Very smart way to keep it on you. And so he kind of throws a little bit of a fit when they don't show up, when it shows up in the, as Jude calls it, the Looney Tunes bank bag, when it shows up in the Looney Tunes bank bag with a giant dollar sign on it, basically. When that happens, Cooper freaks out and goes, where's my knapsack? Yada, yada. If you listen to Bill Radachek's speech he gave to Northwest Airlines Museum, he says that was when they were in the cockpit going, oh no, because they could hear him because Tina had the phone turned on the whole time. Like she had the button mashed, just sitting there. So all the interactions with Cooper that she had, they could overhear it, right? And Bill's like, that was when we were leaned back in our seats going, oh no, because they could hear him going, I wanted a damn knapsack. You know, like he got really pissy about that. But instead of saying, okay, go get me a knapsack then from some kid in the airport and bring it in, or whatever. I mean, because he's still at this point, Cooper is asking for crew meals. He's asking for all these other things. Just ask for a knapsack. But instead of asking for a knapsack, he spends the next hour and a half MacGyvering this bag. Right? Instead of just, so that's what you're saying is like his brain was like, it's, and Larry, as somebody who is ADHD pretty badly, I can kind of smell my own a little bit. And I kind of smell it with Cooper. I think he was a little ADHD. And he was like, and Larry thought that too. Larry said, I think this guy had ADHD because he was kind of like a bit varied in his thinking. And I could see myself doing that, going, okay, I'm going to accomplish this feat.
He didn't do big picture stuff, but he was very focused on a few individual things he did well.
Yes, and he did them well enough. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got Captain Scott and Radicek saying that he was very rational and calm. Captain Scott said he was self-assured. Bill Radicek told the press, he said this guy was as rational as you could expect anybody to be who's doing this sort of thing, which is pretty interesting. And I've always wanted to talk to, if I ever get the chance to talk to Radicek, I want to ask him, they did exchange words with Cooper about certain things there about Reno. And when they were discussing where he wanted to go, that wasn't Tina relaying it. Apparently that was Cooper actually talking to them on the phone. And so I've always wanted to ask him, say, look, did you think he was a contemporary of yours, somebody of a professional level? Or was he no offense to McNally, but was he a kind of a street hood, essentially, And, but maybe they already tell us that, because when you read the 302s, Radicek says that, that this guy knows a thing or two about an airplane. They thought he was perhaps a pilot. Tina called him executive-like. So he didn't seem to be like a regular street hood, which is in line with what we found on the tie, I guess, right? Is that he's a professional.
I think you have to add in desperation too, though. I think in my mind, again, I'm speculating here, I don't have any evidence for it, a guy who was very smart and got put in a predicament, and it was a do or die predicament, would use the brains he has to the extent he can to try and get out of his predicament. And that's what I think we're seeing with Cooper. I think Cooper was a regular guy, and somebody put the screws to him, and he needed 200 grand for something, who knows what. And it was a do or die moment. So he said, okay, I know this, I know this, I knew this. He did it. He just hoped for the best on everything else, like where to jump and all that, and whether the parachutes came on board were correct or not, because he didn't specify. He said front and back. Mm-hmm. So you're smart enough to build a bomb, but not smart enough to order a front, a main and reserve chute. So I think the guys, it didn't matter if he was going to die. I think he was going to probably get killed anyway by whoever was squeezing him, if that was the case. And this is the kind of thing you'd expect to see. All of us would do the same thing. If I put you in a do or die situation right now, in 24 hours, you're going to accomplish this thing. You do your lawyer thing or whatever thing you're familiar with, try and make it happen. And the rest just has to fall into place, which it didn't for everybody else. Cooper was actually the odds of all the 13 guys or whatever that jumped. Cooper was the one that beat the odds, but not because he was smart, because it was just his number came up and he happened to have the winning lottery ticket.
He was first. Is what I say. I mean, obviously, the fact that he was first is what really helped him, because they didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to put trackers in his parachutes like the other ones. They didn't know to do all these other things that they caught the other ones on. So here's another science question for you. What are the chances we get a full DNA profile from the parachute lines we know that Cooper handled, if they were to look for touch DNA on the shroud lines that Cooper handled?
Well, so all the problems with the DNA. If you're going to go to a DNA lab, a forensics DNA lab, you're going to get a DNA sample. I can give you virtually anything that humans have touched and go to a DNA lab, and they'll give you a DNA sample. The problem is, if more than one person has touched it a bunch, there's a bunch of DNA samples on there, and you can't bring it to a DNA lab and say, there's 10 people that have touched this thing. Give me all 10 DNA samples so we can sort out who it is. You can't get a DNA lab to do that. All right. It doesn't happen. And we've talked to professionals about this. They're working on they can get the number one guy. They can get pretty good idea who the number two guy is. And number three guy seems to be out of range the first time I talked to one of these professional guys. All right. Now, I've said before that if you want to do it, you have to use this version called metagenomics. And metagenomics means you can take some dirt and you throw it in this machine. It cranks through all the DNA segments and it interleaves them all together. So it's like you have all the pieces of multiple books in chunks, 2 or 3 word chunks, and you find the overlaps for all the sentences and you rebuild the sentences by putting the overlaps of the chunks that you have together. So I know this is a fact because we used it in a paleontology program that I had, and we put some dinosaur bone into this, and DNA samples from everything that lived on top of the earth where that dinosaur bone was dug up, birds and cows and rats and mice and snakes and lizards. All those DNA things came out. It gave a pie chart of all the DNA that came out of this dinosaur bone. We were arguing that dinosaur bone was not a pristine place to lock up the dinosaur DNA forever. We go, no, everybody's DNA is in there. So this is what you need to do to find the 10 people. Now, why hasn't anybody done that? Because it costs $50,000 a run to do. That's why. It costs $50,000. That's number one. Number two, the metagenomics labs that are capable of this. I have a friend of mine that is very high in the DNA world. He's trying to bring back the passenger pigeon. He's talked to these DNA labs for me, and he said, no, we don't do it unless there's a request from law enforcement. So even if you had the 50 grand, you can't walk into one of these labs and say, all right, yeah, here's the 50 grand. Give me 10 Cooper suspects. So Eric right now is spearheading that whole project. And he's trying to find an ancient DNA lab in another country, because none of them will do it in this country. They're fairly rare, although Eric has come up with more ancient DNA labs than I thought existed. And he is trying to work with some of these guys to come up with a plan on how to get some of these things, some Cooper stuff run through this metagenomics program.
But you're talking about, but what DNA are we talking about?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, because it's the thing about the tie is that what people often ask me about the DNA that the FBI has, and they've got 3 profiles. All are partial. Well, I'm saying from the testing that occurred in 2001, they got 3 profiles. They got 1 major contributor, they called it, and 2 minor contributors. Obviously, all male apparently, which is interesting. But all male DNA, 3 profiles, all partial. And the issue was that when Larry first got the gig, Larry called the crime lab and said, hey, should I keep testing DNA? Because they had tested several people by then. And the crime lab people were very blunt. They said, look, these are partial profiles and not very good partial profiles. So the fact is you could have possibly several million people who would test positive, right? So the risk of a false positive was very high, and that's not going to help anything. Because even if you say, for example, if Sheridan Peterson tested positive, well, then that's not going to help because really it's not provable that there's no 1-to-1. It's just, he has a fragment of it. Well,
right.
So does
noise. Yeah.
Yes. So does Ronald McDonald, I mean, who knows, and so it wasn't helpful, but it was 3 profiles. And so it's not only even a partial profile, you would have had a lot of false positives, but you triple the problem now that you have 3 partial profiles all smushed together, sort of. Right. And it was a nightmare.
So 10% of the or 1% of the country could match those profiles. Yeah.
Right. And it's just useless. But that's why they would say, that's why it took me years, because I would read it online. I would read what people said on Drop Zone when I was lurking back in the ancient times. And I was lurking. I was like, they say that they can rule out a suspect, but not rule somebody in. I'm like, that makes no sense to me. Right. If it's, DNA, but what they mean is if you don't match this, well, then if you don't match any of these profiles, then there's no way you're Cooper, because, so basically they were saying we couldn't confirm that somebody's
right.
Cooper.
That's what Larry told us in the very early days too. He said the DNA profiles were good enough to rule someone out, but they could never convict somebody based on the profile.
Right. But it's interesting though that Larry never tested anybody's DNA. I've got, I believe, maybe 7. Let's see. People, for those watching, let's just go through this. The DNA tested. I know LD Cooper's DNA was tested, eliminated. Gossett tested, eliminated. Dwayne Weber tested, eliminated. Christensen eliminated. I've never seen a document that eliminated Sheridan Peterson, but he was tested. Jason Langseth was tested. And I think that might be it. I think it's maybe 6 guys were tested. It wasn't that many, but Larry tested nobody. Okay, so Larry didn't test anybody because he just thought it was a pointless exercise, and it would just complicate things. So, but that's the tie DNA. But then there's other DNA that was taken from the tie by you, correct?
Theoretically, yes.
Yes.
I did not do a DNA sample. We vacuumed the tie, and there's filters that have particles as well as should have his DNA in them too.
Right.
And we took one of those filters and we gave it to one of the standard forensics guys, and they came up with my DNA.
Yeah, it's like great, and yeah, that's the problem. It's just a difficult thing. So really, the only way we're going to get DNA, because really the only items that we have in evidence, and that's why there is a push going on behind the scenes to try to get the FBI to at least look at the shroud lines, because really the only things we know are that there's the tie, which may have his DNA in there, and then there's the shroud lines that he touched.
Yeah, but the shroud lines have my DNA on them, Carol Eberzinskis' DNA,
right.
Larry's DNA.
Yeah.
No.
And so, well, the good news is that the tie, at least, I mean, the shroud lines almost, I can just say for a fact, I can just say for a fact that the shroud lines have been touched a lot less than the tie. The tie was passed around.
It'd be a much better shot, yes, but you still have to be able to do multiple clean DNA hits off the shroud lines.
Which would come from skin cells. Which would come from skin cells on the shroud lines, likely, right? I mean,
so skin cells are not as common as you might think, right? Because I can see skin cells underneath my electron microscope. And when I'm looking around at stuff that people have handled and things, skin cells are not as common as you might think. There's not, everything you touch doesn't leave hundreds of skin cells behind. Although that's what the media would like you to think. They also like you to think that there's dust mites under your bed. Nobody in the microscope world can find these dust mites that are living under everybody's bed. But there's certainly, if you could get a skin cell, yeah, you could probably get some DNA. But it's going to be competing with everybody else's skin cells.
Yeah, I suppose that the thought among the people who were doing the shroud line stuff is that Cooper would have, when he cut as you said, so the shroud lines, they all converge on a backbone that's in the actual pack. And so he cut through those. But when he cut the top, when he cut the top off, he would have had to have grabbed probably the shroud lines and sawed through, maybe.
Definitely grabbed each shroud line individually and sawed through the knot.
Right. And so he's gripping them and he is putting some tension on them, I would guess. And that might rip off some skin cells.
Good chance. No, I'm not against the shroud line thing at all. I think that would be, if you're going to do a shot, you get one shot on it, I would say the shroud lines are a great shot.
That's all we have other than the tie.
Yeah, we don't have access to it.
Yeah, and that's the problem is, as we've discussed before, that one thing that should happen is that the Cooper evidence needs to be sent to like the Smithsonian, right? So it can be tested.
Still won't happen though. They'll a friend of mine is one of the head paleontologists at the Smithsonian. I don't think I could talk him into it.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
But now if things go to the Smithsonian though, aren't they able to be accessed via requests by scientists and things? Theoretically, okay. So not always.
Not, believe me. When we're in private, I'll tell you some stories.
So it's got to be proven. Okay, so I see. So what's going on? Tell me, just off Cooper for a second. What are you doing with the dinosaurs lately? What's going on with that?
So that's a complicated question. So most people, I think, if you don't know, Google laser fluorescence dinosaur. Right? If you Google those three words, laser fluorescence dinosaur, you'll see pages of stuff that we have done over the past 10 years on making dinosaurs glow in the dark. And what happens when we make them glow, we see things that you can't see under normal light. So most of the time when you look at a fossil, you just see bones, right? But when we go look at some of these fossils that are still embedded in their matrix, they're in a plate, when we fluoresce them, we see soft tissues come out. We see the outline of the muscles. We see the toe pads. We see the scales on the toe pads.
Wow.
We're even getting to the point where we're seeing nerves underneath the skin that were there. Like there's the bird, when the bird stretches his wing out, when a bird stretches his wing out, there's a tendon that goes from the shoulder to the wrist. And we've been able to see that in the preserved stain of when the animal dies. So if you take an animal and you bury him in the ground, and you cover them with sediment and you just leave them there, you've seen animals die and they turn into a grease spot with some bones, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you can keep the grease in place, the chemistry that was part of your skin or part of your fingernails or part of your nerves stays in place. And then we can come in with the laser and we can make it fluoresce. And now we can see the pattern that was left behind if nothing's been disturbed. And it doesn't happen very often, but we've gone to these museums where we look at 100 different specimens and 2 or 3 of them will have this spectacular preservation.
So does that require you to put some kind of chemical on the bone?
No, we never have to touch it. So we shine a laser and the laser makes it fluoresce because the laser is so much more powerful. You can shine a UV light on things and make it fluoresce, right? Everybody's had a black light.
Sure.
Things fluoresce. But not everything fluoresces. When I shine a laser on it, though, it's like hitting the bell harder. Instead of hitting the bell with a mallet, I'm hitting the bell with a sledgehammer. And even if you got a crappy bell, I can still make it ring. Right? So by hitting with a laser, we see things nobody's ever seen before, even if they shined a UV light on it. So this is a big deal. So we're seeing things. For instance, before we got involved, every outline of a dinosaur that you've seen where they reconstructed the outline of the dinosaur was a guess. It was a guess. They had zero data to go by, right? Just based on what it should look like. You know, we found enough outlines, body outlines of this one particular type of dinosaur that we could reconstruct the actual body outline from actual data, right?
Right, instead of guesswork.
Actual data. Right, and that was the first time in the 100 and some year histories of dinosaurs that was done, right? So we were seeing things like the pupil of a pterosaur. Pterosaur is the flying batwing looking thing. So we've got the pupil of the pterosaur that has never been seen before. So that's a reptile, right? What shape is the pupil of reptiles?
Well, they're I don't know if the shape, whether I don't know
Slit.
the shape. Slit. Yeah.
Slit. They're a slit, right? Right. So if it's a slit, that tells you one thing. If it's round, it tells you something else.
Very big distinction.
Right. It's round.
Oh.
It's not what you would expect, right? It's not what you would expect. So this is the type of thing we're using this fluorescence to investigate. And we found the first dinosaur belly button.
What?
Right? Yeah, you can Google dinosaur belly button, and you'll find our paper where we discovered a dinosaur belly button.
That's remarkable, Tom.
Well, the funny thing is dinosaurs are in eggs, so how the hell do they have a belly button, right?
Yeah, that's a good. I was trying to think that. Yeah, I was like, wait a second. But
so as it turns out, the egg yolk feeds into the body about where the belly button is, right? So there's a connection into the animal in the abdomen right there, right where you expect the belly button to be. And in certain kinds of lizards, it leaves a particular paired scales where the scar of that thing entered the body. And we found those paired scales.
Jeez.
See?
Well, I like that. Yeah, because I've seen something recently where they were like, basically, if they applied the same, if paleontologists who draw up dinosaurs did the same thing to a skeleton of a cow without knowing what the cow looked like, it would look like something crazy.
It looks like he's shrink wrapped. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks ridiculous. So like we don't really, but are you finding that at least, I mean, are you able to see, I mean, are they close enough now to what paleontologists thought they looked like? I mean, now that you can see what they really look like, are they close enough?
Well, we're finding feathers on a lot of things now, right? Yeah. So if you look at dinosaurs from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they're all heavily looks like lizards. If you go to the toy store today, next time you go look, you'll see most of the dinosaurs are covered with feathers now.
Oh, great.
Yeah, most of the dinosaurs are covered with feathers. Now, we found a lot of feathers on a lot of dinosaurs, but like, does T-Rex have feathers or not?
I was literally going to ask you that question.
Sure. This is the deal. Do T-Rex have feathers or not? We have some skin impressions of T-Rex. Only this is just like D.B. Cooper, right? I can tell you the best guess is X because we only have a limited amount of data. So they found some skin impressions. They found some skin impressions on the face. They found some skin impressions on the body. The skin impressions don't show feathers. But in our analysis, the relatives of T-Rex, close relatives of T-Rex, both have feathers. So it is functional to believe that if your ancestors had blonde hair, do you have blonde hair? Well, good chance. Not 100%, but good chance. So now you'll see if you look at a T-Rex reconstruction as of recently, you'll see that they kind of have a mixture of feathers and scales.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah. So one of the projects I'm involved in right now is we're looking to see if we can find feathers on a T-Rex, because we're using the laser to try and find them.
Oh, right. So you have to have access, but does it, obviously you guys would have to have access to the original fossil, not the reproduction they put out on display, right?
Right. That's what we always go to these museums and we look at the original fossils.
Yeah. I've seen people bitch about that. They're like, oh, well, the T-Rex on display is not, it's, some of the bones are not real. I'm like, well, I mean, I wouldn't put it out there either.
So that's the way they used to do it. And then everybody started complaining. All right. So now when they redo these exhibits, they usually mount the real specimen.
Oh,
right, which is now a problem for us because they never want to take the bones down from the real specimen mount for you to look at them.
Well, so obviously Sue in the Field Museum, is that a reproduction or is that the real fossil?
The real deal.
That's the real deal.
Deal.
Well, that's intimidating. I tell you what, for people who've never actually seen a T-Rex, like a full scale T-Rex, it's very chilling. It's terrifying, really.
Animal, yeah, it could bite your head off. Yes, it could.
It's scary.
Just looking at a skeleton, you can tell if it's real bones or not, because when they mount the real bones, they've got little wire hooks at each end of the leg bone, right? Or the long bones have little hooks in them that hold it in place. If you don't see any metal armature behind the bones with little hooks coming around the bones, it's a cast.
Oh, because it can stand up. Yeah, I see.
Because they put the metal rods through the casts.
Right.
But they don't do that in the real bones. They don't drill holes through the real bones. It costs like almost $1 million to mount Sue, just to put the mount up.
Man, right. And I was surprised to see how it's interesting. It sounds like a lot of money, but people can buy a T-Rex for several $1 million, and I'm like, well, I would think a T-Rex would be like $50 million or something, right?
No, the last one sold for $35 million.
Oh, did it? Okay. Because I'm thinking of Sue.
$1 million T-Rexes don't exist anymore. All my ranchers want to find one.
I bet. Because they can sell it. Yeah. I guess that's true. So was T-Rex see, I'm nerding out now. If the DB Cooper talk is done, go away if you're interested in DB Cooper. I have a paleontologist with me. I'm going to talk to him. So was T-Rex a scavenger or a hunter? I mean, that's always a debate too, I see.
So, so these are the popular press things, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. It's a good question to ask, actually. So they never thought of him as a scavenger. One guy, famous paleontologist Jack Horner, brought that up, right? And he said, well, it probably was a scavenger. There's conflicting evidence based on how fast the Rex could run. Some studies have said that the Rex, you could outrun a Rex, that he couldn't run very fast. Other studies said, no, he could run damn fast, right? So if you go with the study that says he couldn't run very fast, that means he couldn't catch the big animals that he was trying to eat because they could run faster than him. There's a leg length thing that's problematic. Depends how you look at the toes. If he runs on his toes, he has a better chance. So if he can't catch the prey that he's after, then he was probably a scavenger. If he could run fast enough to catch the prey, then he would just bite things. Now, that being said, they found dinosaurs with a bite taken out of the top of the tail, right, that healed. Right? So there's only one thing that can take the bite out of the top of the tail, and that's T-Rex. And it happened when he was living.
Oh, I see.
Right. So the bite was healed over. So at least in that one case, the T-Rex was getting lucky on a live animal, but didn't quite finish the job. Yeah,
the T-Rex is it's interesting for those who don't know. It's Paleontology Hour. I always love the thing when you always see on these memes that are like, Cleopatra lived closer to the iPhone than she did to the pyramids being constructed. Right? There's these things that are like, mess with your time of history. It's like. Yeah. We are closer to T-Rex than T-Rex was to Stegosaurus. That's one I see a lot.
Right. The long neck dinosaurs, the long neck thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The distance between the long necks and T-Rex is greater than this between T-Rex and us now.
And so that's the, what do they call those? The brontosaurus types.
Brontosaurus, fine.
Sauropods, I guess. Sauropods.
Yeah.
Sauropods, yeah. So T-Rex would never have encountered a sauropod.
Allosaurus. You heard of Allosaurus? He
Yes,
was the one that ran with the brontosaurus.
that's like the proto T-Rex, I guess, sort of.
Yeah, yeah, the earlier. It's just kind of a smaller version of T-Rex. Yeah.
Right. I remember when I was a kid, my heart broke all the time whenever I watched like Walking with Dinosaurs, and they had Al, the Allosaurus, who died of an infection. I was like, oh, poor Al. He had an infection in his foot or something, and it killed him. Like
the new Walking with Dinosaurs is coming out. We might be in it.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, they photographed us. We went to Montana last year and filmed. We have a drone with a laser on it that flies at night, and the laser scans the ground, trying to make fossils fluoresce and identify where they're at. Wow. So they filmed us doing that. We'll see if it makes it in the final cut. But yeah, the new version's coming out next year, I believe, 2025.
Oh, wow. Do you know the story about the Colorado Rockies baseball team? You know, their mascot is Dinger. It's Triceratops. I'm not sure if you knew that or not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So their mascot that they've had ever since they started in the 90s is this Triceratops. There's this Triceratops walking around the ballpark all the time named Dinger. And the reason is they found a Triceratops skull when they were digging up Coors Field where they built the field on. So
nice. Excellent.
Yeah. So I mean, Colorado obviously must have been, because Colorado there's lots of T-Rexes and Triceratopses there. So
very few types. So the only place you find T-Rex is really Montana and Wyoming.
Oh, okay.
A little corner of South Dakota. They may have found something in South Dakota, but South Dakota's not known for that kind of dinosaur.
But why is that? Why is it just there? I don't understand.
Geology. So, you have to look at the age of the rocks at the surface of the ground, right? So if it's too old, it has fossils from that period. If it's too young, it has fossils from another period. So if you look at a geologic map, there's only very few, it's the green color on a geologic map. Very few areas that actually are late Cretaceous where the T-Rex lived.
And we're probably missing a lot of stuff that's now underwater, right? It's just like how we find whales now or mosasaurs in Wyoming. There's probably, it's the inverse, right? I mean, things that are at the bottom of the Pacific may have been dinosaurs at one point, right?
Yeah. Well, you can get situations like that, but if the land masses rise up, like we have the land mass here next to me is the ocean bottom. So we have the ocean bottom, we have the beach, and then we have the terrestrial things. So we can find dinosaurs and we can find things that lived in the ocean within an hour of where I'm at.
Oh yeah, I guess I was wrong because I guess Pangea is still the same continents we have now. I guess so. It's just you're right.
Pangea was the when all. Right,
I'm saying it's the same land though. It's the same land, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's mostly the same land. There's some stuff. The sea levels went up and down and stuff. So based on sea level rise, you could say some of it's under the ocean now.
Okay. So I'm sure I know your answer to this, but I'll ask you this real quick. The possibility of Sasquatch, of a Sasquatch thing somewhere in the Canadian wilderness or whatever.
So you'd have fossils of them.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
You'd have fossils.
Isn't that Gigantopithecus or whatever?
Gigantopithecus, yeah. So if you're saying that he survived all this time, then 10,000 years ago, he should have been here too. We know almost all the animals, especially the bigger the animal it is, the more likely we're going to know about the fossil record of it, because the big bones preserve much better than small bones. If he was the size of the mouse, then I can say, yeah, we may have missed him all this time. Right? but if he's as bigger than we are and he's got giant bones, we would be seeing a fossil record all the way up to the present day. And that would tell us that he's still out there more than anything else.
So the Gigantopithecus is really, it's millions of years old, not.
I don't know because I don't work in that neighborhood.
Right. But they were big though.
He's somewhere back in time there in the last million years, a lot of stuff has happened in human evolution. We don't pay attention to that stuff.
Right. Do you pay attention? I mean, you're a dinosaur guy, so you don't. I
always like archaeology. I'm leaving for the month of August, and I'm going 2 weeks with my colleague Michael Pittman in Mexico, and we're going to be shining a bunch of archaeological artifacts in Mexico, and then we're going to 2 weeks in Peru, and we're going to be looking at the tattoos on the Inca mummies.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so they're covered with tattoos, and they don't know really what kind of ink there is in them, and they don't know if there's any variation in the tattoos. So we're going to fluoresce them and see if we can bring out more details in the Inca tattoos. And we're also going to go to Machu Picchu and look at the stones. You know, the stones that are fit into each other in Machu Picchu. They're you can't put a piece of paper between them.
Right.
And we're going to scan the stones there and see if we can determine anything. We don't know. It's shot in the dark. We'll see if we learn anything about that.
you're scanning. Are you doing that on the fluorescence thing again?
Yeah, we're going to use the laser. We're going to go out at night to Machu Picchu, and we're going to shine the lasers on the walls, and we're going to record the images.
I mean, you're going to get a lot of like chisel marks and things that aren't seen.
We could. It would be good to know. It'd be good to know. If we see chisel marks in one and not in another, it could be interesting. It could be another Tina Bar. Could be.
Well, you're mentioning South America. I read something recently on, because I'm also into archaeology. I read an article about how they found, I guess, in the Amazon, now that they're using the LiDAR stuff.
LiDAR, yeah.
Yeah, they're finding villages that are enormous in the Amazon. Well, old villages that go back 500 years, 600 years, whatever.
So there is a scary fact that's, I don't know if it's 100% fact at this point, but it's appearing in that world. It appears that the entire South American jungle was engineered, because the plants that are in South American jungles are not the kind of plants that should actually be there. They're the kind of plants that would be there after your residential neighborhood got overgrown.
Oh, I see. So it's kudzu gone wild. It's the Amazon, basically.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. That's, like I said, that's not my field. But I've read some interesting things lately that talk about that. This is could be a real thing, that the whole place was engineered.
Wow. Well, I mean, people often made fun of the Spaniards who would, like, there are some Spanish accounts where they're like, oh, there's these villages that go on for 5 leagues or whatever. And people are like, that's bullshit. But apparently there are.
Maybe, right? Well, the entire northwest of the United States, right? New Hampshire, Vermont, all those areas up there.
Yeah.
Was completely denuded of trees. It was not a tree to be found. They completely settled that whole area, and there's brick walls that show where all the houses used to be up there. And now it's all forest again, right? It's all forest again.
Well, it's kind of like that. If you remember that show, there was that show that was like, Life After People, right? On the History Channel. It was like, that basically everything would be overgrown in 100 years, even. It wouldn't take that long for there still be some things. Milton Vordal's granddaughter is in the chat. She's mentioning the Yanomamis. The Yanomami. I actually spent time with the Yanomami. My stepfather was he grew up among them as a missionary. So we would go down there and hang out with them. And that was really cool as a kid to shoot arrows with Stone Age Indians and things. Really neat. They were fascinating people down there. And there's not that many of them left, sadly, that are like that. Just don't go to, what's the island where people get killed all the time in the Pacific? What's the one? Sentinel Island.
Sentinel Island.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. Only people that are still untouched, probably for their own good.
Yeah. No kidding. But it's always so fascinating because clearly they see jets flying over and things. So they know that there's.
Well, it's the cargo cult thing, right? Have you ever heard that?
Right. Yeah.
Cargo cult thing where they go, it's gods, right? Those are the gods. They just haven't landed here yet.
Right. Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. So we're coming up on 2 hours now. So I'll wrap up, and basically I will thank Tom, and essentially that Tom is doing, I'll say that the Macron stuff is really exciting. That's really cool. That I guess I was going to, one more thing. The images were like, so are the actual images better now too?
I don't know. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen a new set of images yet. The images,
it was like just 1 pixel. It was like nothing, right?
Well, they're like 200 by 250 by 50. There's some very low resolution. Yeah.
Okay.
But remember, they took a big picture and then they sucked out just a little subframe of the particle.
Okay. So interesting. Okay. So, and now this is just one sticky stub they're testing, right?
Well, no, so they said that they would do 4 for $2,000. They're $500 a piece, 4 stubs.
Right.
So we have $2,000. We can theoretically do 4 stubs. If it's worth spending more money to do one, because we know what particles generally on each stub, and the tie knot stubs are the ones that have the biggest variety of particles on them, right? So if we're gonna gamble, it might be better off to gamble more money on the one stub to get better data out of it and find more particles.
And this is something I should know, but which area of the tie did the T sub come from?
The what came from? The what?
The titanium antimony. That's the.
The titanium antimony comes from the knot.
Okay.
The knot.
Okay.
The regular titanium, the titanium bar, the original titanium bar comes from further down on the die.
Right. And that's really the takeaway recently is that this guy's hands were filthy, basically.
Filthy.
I mean, this isn't like particles flying off this is touch.
No, you know that he smeared crap on his die. Yeah. Maybe use his tie as a mop. Who knows? Right.
Right. Fascinating. All right, then. Well, okay, folks. Well, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to say thanks to Tom for his time, and he is doing some cool stuff. He's a real life Dr. Alan Grant.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. All right, take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching. Talk to you soon. See you at CooperCon.
All right, Tom. Bye.
Bye-bye.